Well, what would a liberal democracy offer these people? You say they're not being offered a life by the Aboriginal industry. What does the rest of Australian society, liberal and free and prosperous that it is, offer them instead?
A different contract. We know that you have to understand the value of creating wealth, indeed of creating value. So all the disciplines of going to school, getting a decent education, learning to read and write and speak English, and getting a job and paying taxes and bringing up a family. All of the basics are the only things you need. They're really quite simple. They're the only things you need to have a good chance in a liberal democracy. These are not being flat out denied by the industry, but the assumption is, and the learning of Aboriginal people in remote communities, I don't need that. I don't need to play by the rules of the white man. So in fact, what we find in the last 30, 40 years is a desire to opt out. Up until 1967, and with 1967, 92% of Australians said welcome on the basis of equality to Aboriginal people. But almost at that moment, an Aboriginal elite said, wow, we're special. Our culture's more important than anyone else's. And you, poor remote Aborigines, have to go and live it while we in Sydney and Melbourne can play up and make heroes of ourselves. And $33 billion a year later, we've still got this supposed gap between how Aborigines do and the rest of society. But that's not the gap. The gap is between 20% of Aborigines and all other Aborigines and all other Australians. It's this, may I call it, a remnant group who haven't adapted, haven't found a pathway into the liberal society. That's what I'm addressing.
Well, one of the things we hear a lot about these days is the term First Nations or Aboriginal nations. But you say, this is one of the better quotes from the book, and I highly recommend the book to all the viewers because it's filled with excellent research and impeccable opinions. But here's a quote from it. Quote, "To label Aboriginal clans First Nations is a cruel hoax. Many are barely families," unquote. What's the technical difference between a family and a nation, and why do you call it a cruel hoax?
Well, the technical difference is about 1,000 years of history. We, that is, those who live in nation states, know that it is one of the greatest creations of mankind because behind the walls of a nation state, you have an agreement to have protection by the state from external invaders and, of course, a taxation system and a rule of law and so on and so forth. It basically keeps you safe. In tribal society, nothing much kept you safe. You were simply, you could bump into the next group wandering across the desert and you would have to negotiate very quickly or you would be killed. We had this dream that Aboriginal society was somehow peaceful. It was not. They would have made colonialists, except they didn't have sufficient advancement to actually take over another tribe. They didn't have a surplus, so you could have two blokes standing guard while the others hunted, They didn't even get to that level of sophistication. So the 50,000 years where nothing much developed in terms of how you manage people beyond the really crude elements of harsh disciplines and sorcery. And with great respect, all of our society started that way, but only those in Northern Europe, beginning 1,000 years ago, started to build social institutions that would eventually, through much blood and invasions and all the rest of it, but eventually would build nation states. Now, Aborigines have never built nation states. They can never build nation states. But thank God for them, they live in a nation state, even though it was, if you like, forced upon them. And 80% of Aborigines welcome it.